Requiem aeterna.
Hi there, this is Brent.
And this is Amanda.
We are the Unreliable Narrators.
Here to talk about the strangeness, the mystery, and the wonder of Gene Wolfe's prose.
What is time?
What is memory?
What is a person?
Is this reality?
Where are we?
Do we exist?
Have you ever considered that all your choices are what brought you right here to this very moment?
Episode number 22, continuing with Bibliomen. First published by Cheap Street Press in 1984, and then republished in an expanded version by Broken Mirrors Press in 1995. Okay, Brent, we're continuing on. There are more characters waiting for a book.
Yeah, but before we do that, I have a note here from last time we recorded.
What is that?
Well, listeners, Amanda was joking that she buys a lot of books.
Shh. Don't tell anybody that.
In the interlude between recordings last time, she said, well, I just bought a book. I was like, wait, you bought a book while we were recording?
Yes.
Okay, not to tattle on you, but...
I buy books like some people breathe.
Just so the listeners understand that I'm not exaggerating the number of books that surround us.
No, not just the number of books that surround us, but the number of books that were acquired within the last, let's say 2 weeks. It's embarrassing. Although I'm also proud of it. I did manage to pick up a first edition, first printing of Orbit #1, edited by Damon Knight. I'm quite excited about that.
Yeah, that's a hard one to find.
Yeah, I don't see it online anywhere, at least not in the first edition. So I snagged it out of the back of a display case in a bookstore. And the proprietor was like, well, if you're not going to buy that, I'm going to raise the price. And I got away with what I think was probably either a 1995 or maybe as late as a 2001 price on it. So
Nice. Mildly jealous, but we won't talk about that.
well, I mean, it's not like you haven't been buying books lately either.
I have not.
He lies.
Peter O. Henry.
Yes, Peter O. Henry, born January 22nd, 1965, in Detroit, Michigan, the oldest son of a teacher.
I guess the obvious thing, O. Henry, so his middle initial and last name. He was a short story writer that was known for the twist endings.
Yes, probably most famously Gift of the Magi.
Uh-huh.
That's the sentimental and cheesy one that everyone knows.
Yeah, and has been filmed, and even Futurama did a joke version of it.
I'm unsurprised.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Peter O. Henry, he seems to have been a precocious child. Or the standards at college writing workshops are very low. I quite like this paragraph. His mother produces some of his childish stories. Some of the tales she preserved from a period hardly later, manuscripts scrawled in pencil and crayon, are at least good enough to earn the condemnation of most college writing workshops. That's a great phrasing.
Yeah. I like the turn on it there where it's, if you're good enough, the writing workshops will condemn you.
Yes, and that turn on expectation, because you're expecting to read commendation. I think you're expecting to read commendation, but it's actually condemnation. And we know that Wolfe's misspellings, or Wolfe's word choice, and then even his misspellings tend to be intentional. So,
What was it was a hunting story that you...
yeah, I just recently read a hunting story in a collection edited by Roger Elwood and Virginia Kidd called Saving Worlds. And the editor's comment before the story is Virginia Kidd saying all of his misspellings are intentional.
Yeah, that was in my mind as you were making that comment.
Yeah.
So, and then college was not for Henry, the oldest son of a poor woman with several younger children to support. So he left school forever at the age of 14 and went to a car dealership.
Yeah, not an auspicious beginning for an author.
But it was during this time that he composed 2 cigarettes, and I'm not sure if I'm going to say this right, but a Black Gory?
Goy.
Goy, which makes sense. It's a Jewish word, and it can have two meanings because it can either mean something that Jewish people use to describe non-Jews,
Right.
essentially what Gentiles. It's used in Hebrew in the Old Testament, and it can mean nation. So either we have a black Gentile or a black nation, depending on how you read that.
Yes, but of course, all we get is the title of the short story and no details to help us determine what might be meant here.
So, and then in 81, he was arrested for burglary.
Yeah, and maintained his innocence, but was convicted anyway. And the phrasing here is maintained his innocence in court, making plea bargaining impossible. And as a result, was confined for nearly 3 years. So he was in prison for 3 years for a burglary he claims to not have committed.
And so then he left Detroit, went to North Carolina.
Yes, to live with his maternal grandmother.
And so then we have a list of other short stories that he was believed to publish during this.
Right, the King of the Toads.
And Wonder Mountain Melody, The Highest Jail in the World.
Perhaps his best known story today, says the parenthetical.
And Bob at the Big Rock.
Yes. I think this is just one of those moments where this is just fun to make up story titles without having to write the stories.
Yeah, because now we're just imagining like,
oh yeah, the highest jail in the world. Okay, I could think of many different stories that could fit that title.
Just as an aside here, when I was talking with Dan Knight, he had mentioned that he had a short story title. It was The Tactile Importance of Lawn Furniture.
Okay. That's a great title.
It is. And R.A. Lafferty told him the title was perhaps the greatest words written, but the short story did not live up to the title.
Oh, dear. Have you gotten to read this story so you can find out if that is a correct assessment?
I have not, so.
Oh, my goodness. Okay, so this sentence threw me when I first read it. After we get this list of titles, it's all these and many others we have lost are thought to have been composed on the word processor of the Verona Public Library. All these and many others we have lost. And so I think that my brain fritzed out a little bit. Did we lose these or did we lose others? But then, of course, if The Highest Jail in the World is perhaps his best known story today, then we didn't lose these.
I had the same fritz in my brain.
So that convoluted sentence structure and also just knowing that we should be looking for clues, sometimes it throws you off of things that shouldn't be that confusing.
Yeah, Wolfe puts little fake out traps in there.
Yeah, so he uses the word processor at the Verona Public Library, which Henry was sometimes permitted to use after work when the library was closed and the librarians were straightening up. So he seems to have some kind of deal with the librarians that he's allowed to go in there and use the word processor.
Yeah.
Foreshadowing of the days to come, where in the present day, if you walk into our local public library, you see more computers than you see books.
Yeah, entire floor cleared out for books.
Yeah, cleared out of books. I don't know. I find computers and word processing function extremely useful in my life. It is discouraging to see bookshelves gone and computers in their place.
It is. And it's a perennial frustration of mine, especially with this podcast, because to do something on a computer book related, you need to know exactly what you're looking for. So most of the time when I'm trying to do an interlibrary loan, they want to know what pages do you want or what chapter.
Right. And you don't necessarily have that information. You're doing research, and it's very difficult to get a librarian to be able to take your request and then logically assess it and return what it is you need. Or even take your request, look at the source, and then return with whatever appropriate questions are necessary.
Yep. And this is how because I was doing interlibrary loan on some of Wolfe's articles from plant engineering. And so the index is wrong. And so instead of actually looking at what I asked for, they sent me the wrong article because
they just sent you the page numbers you asked for and paid no attention to the fact that the title and author didn't match.
Yes.
See, very frustrating. I feel cautious of being down on librarians because the majority of librarians, I think, are doing lots of good work. It's just not necessarily what we believe library work is. Librarians are now in the social position of being effectively frontline social workers, which is a lot of work and energy and effort. It's just not library work.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if it's just our local public library. It is fulfilling a very needed service, which is helping people search for jobs, helping people access resources when they're in difficult circumstances. And those are all good things. They're just not what I think of as library things.
Yeah, I agree.
All right. Long discursion here, but Peter O. Henry is aided by these librarians and given access to their word processor. Up until July of 1986, when Henry loses all four of the fingers from his right hand while attempting to clear a jam in a knitting machine.
This sounds horrible.
It does sound horrible. Industrial accidents are horrible. I've never been involved in one. I haven't worked in an environment where I would, but I have a sibling who worked at a pizza place. And
I'm worried where this story's going.
oh, I would have thought you would know this story. I have a sibling who worked at a pizza place who had to roll out the pizza dough. And so they have a dough rolling machine, which is a set of rolling pins on a motor. And you feed the lump of dough through several different times. And it has different settings for first time through with the lump of dough. And then you keep sending it through and lowering the settings until it's thin as a pizza crust should be. And there was a lump of dough that paused and she did the thing that you're not supposed to do and poked it with fingers and got the whole hand sucked into the machine.
Ow.
So I still remember the stressful moment of getting that phone call and driving to the pizza place and then taking them to the emergency room and then the many months of physical therapy afterwards to rehabilitate hand function. Scars are still there. There's verifiable physical evidence of this. And that's just a relatively benign machine. It just rolls out pizza dough. It's not like a steel rolling machine, or apparently a knitting machine can remove fingers, which doesn't surprise me at all. Those rapidly moving metal parts can enormous damage.
Well, I feel bad following up this, but I feel like Wolfe added a joke in here because
there can be a joke. I have another dark industrial accident story to tell. And if you want to just lighten the mood here, I won't tell you about my grandfather degloving his hand in a hay baler. Oh, wait, did I just say degloving?
You did. And I don't know if I'm going to edit this part out. Anyway.
You don't want to traumatize our listeners.
So the accident happened in July?
Yes.
And he lost 4 fingers.
July 4th?
Yeah, July 4th. And then later on in the paragraph, we get it. Perhaps it was the happiest part of his adult life.
Yes.
So the losing of 4 fingers in July brought him independence because he got workman's comp and...
Yeah, he got workman's comp and unemployment. And so he had time to himself.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I actually think that this is a joke. And I think it's a funny one because there are plenty of people working difficult jobs who actually consider something like an industrial accident where they are getting paid out a set amount of money to be the kind of thing they would actually hope for, because that's how you get independence.
Yeah. During this time, he published his only published work, and it's Dusty Wings in the magazine Fantasy and Science Fiction.
Yes, it appears in November of the following year.
So that would have been the 1987 issue.
Yes. Did you look up the 1987 November issue of the magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction?
I did, but I don't know if Wolfe just stuck that in there or if he's calling out something, because there's no story title and none of the stories seem to have anything to do with Dusty Wings, but...
Yeah, there's no story title that overlaps and no authors published in that edition that connect. So it seems like he might have just picked it out. Although our good friend Ursula K. Le Guin has a story in that issue. And so that jumped out to me that she's there, but I don't have a connection for that. Just that Le Guin endorsed Wolfe as our Melville, which is the most often repeated cover blurb in the history of cover blurbs. And so she appeared in that magazine, but I didn't see anything that connected to Dusty Wings or Peter O. Henry.
Neither did I. The only with the Buffalo Gals, which was the novelette by Le Guin, I had a memory of there being a chickadee, but that was from the book Buffalo Gals, which is a collection of the short stories, and the chickadee was in a different story.
Not in the Buffalo Gals.
Yeah. So kind of a dead end there.
Yeah. So his story Dusty Wings comes out in November of 1987. And then also in late 1987, he was admitted to the hospital in New Bern suffering from pneumonia. It is reported that he had lain drunk in a field throughout the previous night. He died 2 days later on November 2nd. That's not a very glorious end.
He'll do that, though, laying out in winter.
Will give you pneumonia?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then Purple Cat Tom has been much anthologized, and his doll with a broken nose was the basis for an English language opera.
Yeah, and it's now traditionally performed around New Year's Day.
Yeah, and the only thing, I'm probably going to butcher this, but listeners should be used to that by now.
They wouldn't still be on this journey with us if they weren't okay with our mispronunciations.
Yeah. So it's Lothar Schmid.
Yeah.
Who supposedly made this opera, The Short-Nosed Doll. But as far as I can tell, he was a chess grand master. And he was born into a family where it's the Karl May Press in Germany. But other than that, he seemed to be a collector of books, but specifically chess books.
Yeah, not related to opera.
Yeah. And then I tried finding somebody with the same name, but not as well known.
Maybe as Wolfe was writing this character sketch, he just looked up on his shelf and there was, I don't know, a chess book with his name on it, or I don't know.
Neither do I. And it's hard to say what's accident, what's happenstance, and what is he intended it to.
Yes. I think we tend to err on the side of assuming that it was intentional, where it may have just been casual. Yeah. I didn't find anything about Lothar either.
Closing thoughts on
Peter O. Henry?
Yeah.
I don't know. Just the life of a short story writer might be kind of bleak, or the bleak lives may lead to short story writing.
Ow.
Oh, well, I don't know. The harder life is, the more you write short stories with excellent titles. Although the tactical importance of lawn furniture comes from Dan Knight, who's one of the sunniest people in existence. So,
well, I don't really have much more about Mr. O. Henry. So, number 10, John J. Johns Jr.
Yeah, this one's a little funny.
Yeah, and I don't know. You probably haven't. There's an old John James Jingleheimer Smith.
Oh, yeah. I've heard that. I've heard that jingle, that, I don't know, nursery rhyme, whatever it is.
Yeah, I was just thinking of that. It was John J. Johns Jr., but so he was born in Dallas, Texas, April 15th, 1942. Graduated University of Texas, BA 1963.
Yeah, and in 1974, Johns visited New York City for the first time, and like many first-time visitors, developed Manhattan's Revenge, which left him in need of a restroom. Okay, so there are layers here.
Yeah.
It's not normally Manhattan's Revenge that we discuss when we talk about someone having an urgent need for a bathroom while traveling.
Yeah, that's Montezuma's Revenge.
That's typically what I've heard, Montezuma's Revenge, or oops, I drank some water, or use the tap water when I brush my teeth in a place whose bacterial life my digestive system is unfamiliar with.
Yeah, I work with some coworkers that go to India, and there's Delhi belly is another term that I've heard.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds about right. I've traveled somewhat on the African continent, and I haven't heard a Africa version of that. So maybe it's because you're dealing with such a wide variety of languages and cultures, but we've got the classic Mexico, Montezuma's Revenge, and then Deli Belly, which is cheerful, like a candy, not like explosive diarrhea.
Well, there is that. Part of the layer there, I think that Manhattan's Revenge, part of it is good luck finding a public restroom when you need one.
Yes.
I've never been to New York, so I don't know what.
Yeah, I haven't been there either. I don't know if they have particularly difficult to find restrooms. There are places where it's hard to find a bathroom. I was stranded one time in the middle of San Francisco, 6 months pregnant, in urgent need of a bathroom because your blood volume goes up, your need for water goes up, and somebody thinks it's funny to tap dance on your bladder. That somebody's now 17, so I think I've forgiven him for it. But it's a very stressful situation. I cried when I finally found a bathroom that time.
Well, you ended up better than John.
Yeah, I didn't get mugged. Poor John.
Yeah, I assume he has diarrhea looking for a bathroom, and he holds it for 20 minutes. And the implication being, when he recovered consciousness, he resolved never to endure a similar crisis.
Yeah, because he gets mugged in what's called a subway comfort station, which is, I'm assuming, what they call the public bathrooms in the subway system.
I did not look that up, but in my mind, I was imagining something similar to like an airplane restroom.
Yeah, something small and uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Yeah, so he gets mugged, and so he decides, being fortunately of independent means, this is where, little callback here to Peter O. Henry, who loses 4 fingers and gains independence because of his workman's compensation. John J. Johns Jr., as with many juniors, is a man of inherited means. So he's of independent means, and so he spends 15 years researching his book, A Guide to the Public Toilets of America, which contained directions to hundreds of clean, safe restrooms throughout the 50 states, the District of Columbia, and Puerto Rico, as well as instructions for discovering such facilities in localities not covered by the guide, all in a handy pocket-sized format. This is fantastic because a guide that not only tells you where to find the bathrooms you need in many places, but also gives you a method for identifying locations.
Yeah, and I think there's a joke in there too where it's handy pocket-sized format, because back before toilet paper was a mass-produced commodity. So imagine, for a recent example, imagine when COVID.
Yes, and people were having to come up with alternatives.
Yeah, so it was fairly common to just use a page out of a pamphlet or like a cheap chapbook. So a page that you'd already read, and then you would just tear it out.
And magazines were not preferred because glossy pages don't function as well as non-glossy pages.
So it was fairly common to just pull the page out, do your business, and then leave either the pamphlet or the book in the outhouse or the restroom. So I think that there's a joke in there where it's a handy pocket-sized format.
So it's also functioning as a guide and as an aid.
The other thing here, and I kind of went back, but I think like my comment where I needed to find a dictionary for printer slang, I wonder if I missed something here because it said it was published to little notice in 1990 and within a year had sold over 1 million copies. So 1990 would have been the future when this book was, because
Yes.
84 was when Bibliomen was first published. So now I'm just like, oh, have I missed things in previous episodes because I wasn't paying as close attention to the dates as I should have been?
And that this is a futuristic story.
Yeah.
About
Crappers.
Yes, John's. Yeah. That's the obvious joke, right? His name is John, and he's giving us a guide to the John. So if John's had not been rich already, John's guide, as it came to be called, would have made him so. But it was ignored by the critics. He's apparently bothered by the fact, or at least our narrator is bothered by the fact that there's no critical notice of this extremely useful, very practical guide.
Not even ignored by the critics, but his name was not brought up for discussions for the Nobel Prize for Literature.
Right. Like not brought up, but not mentioned in most discussions for candidates for the next Nobel Prize. So here's Wolfe it's just the whole story is this whole little vignette is a joke about the practical versus the ethereal, the literary versus the utilitarian. Here we have a very useful guide that is sometimes used as toilet paper, and it should be recognized for a Nobel Prize. Not for literary merit, but for practical merit.
Well, and so John's produced his Meditations on the Utilitarian Theory of Literary Merit.
Yes, I didn't realize I was quoting that so directly, but yes, that is the next line.
Yeah, and utilitarianism, I think it's specifically an American-grown ethical philosophy, but it has to do with making choices that bring the most good to the most number of people.
Yes.
So then when you're thinking about that and you're applying that to literary merit, isn't this just a fancy title for a book we already know called Everybody Poops?
Which came somewhat later.
First published in English in 1993.
Well, there you go. Yeah, I think it is. Yeah, everybody poops, and we all need a book that will help us find a place to do that. Okay, the closing paragraph is dark and hilarious.
Yeah. Content warning? I don't know.
Yeah, probably content warning. Johns died of accidental causes in 1998, having apparently attempted to clean the front sight of his .357 Magnum with his teeth and pulled the trigger in the process. What the heck? That has got to be the cleverest, and I don't know, it's very dark, but it is kind of funny way to describe someone committing suicide in a gruesome and brutal fashion.
Yeah. So after he committed suicide, a complete revision of his famous guide was discovered amongst his papers and was published 1999.
Yes, with a large promotional budget.
I have a question on this. So
Yes.
only after several million copies had poured from the presses was it discovered that the directions in the revised edition were uniformly incorrect.
Yes.
So here's my question.
Okay.
And this kind of goes back to him not being able to find a public restroom in the first paragraph. So several million copies, I assume that people are buying these. And if several million are sold until somebody notices that the directions are incorrect, doesn't that mean that even with incorrect directions, people are finding these public restrooms that he's purposely misleading them away from?
Okay, so that's one reading. My reading was that the publishers didn't support him. When it first came out, there was little notice, which means that the publishers were not promoting the text. It sold very well anyway.
Mm-hmm.
He's depressed because he didn't get the Nobel Prize. He blows the back of his head off. Sorry, retroactive content warning. And gets his revenge on the reading public for not recognizing what a service he'd done by undermining that service. And so my reading of the several million copies were sold. Well, actually, what does it say? Several million copies had poured from the presses is that this is a joke on the publisher, not the pooping public, because they are like, okay, well, there was a notorious and news-making suicide. The first edition sold extremely well without promotion. So we're going to sell millions because we're actually going to promote this one now that the guy's dead and can't profit from it. And so they printed millions of copies. And then once some had gotten out and it had had a chance to get around. So I read that it was discovered right away. But because the publisher had made such poor choices, then the publisher was left with. That's how I read that.
Okay, that's probably a better reading. Because I did make a jump there from poured from the presses to assume
that they were all sold and circulating.
Yeah, which it doesn't say.
Yeah, I'm not sure about the 1990s publishing world, but I do think that when you expect a book to sell well, you print a lot to begin with. And that's how publishers often end up losing money because they did too large of a print run on something. Stephen King has sold a 1.5 billion books. Therefore, we'll print 20 million of this. And oh, wait, nobody wanted The Dark Tower or whatever it was. I don't actually know the publishing history here. I was just pulling a Stephen King title out of the air.
Yeah, well, he's famous enough. Correct me if I'm wrong, but this is where we get remainder marks.
Yeah, remainder marks.
Okay, which if you are on the book collecting subreddit, you're going to see, is this mold?
And very often it's a remainder mark.
Yeah.
Which is where the publisher goes through and puts a black mark, typically on the bottom of the text block, although sometimes they're on the top of the text block of a book. And then they send them out to discount retailers. So the remainder mark means that it can't be sold for the full list price. And then the remainder mark makes it less collectible. It's a slight damage to the book. And so then it goes to bookstores that specialize in just remainders and then enters the market that way. There's a very famous, oh man, okay, I'm going to butcher this and probably shouldn't bring it up, but there's a poem by a famous author and there's a line in there about the books of my enemies have been remaindered. And it's like, this is the thing that you hope, is that your rival ends up with their books remaindered rather than you.
So he leaves a will, and as specified in his will, John's grave marker is inscribed Cloaca Deception.
Yeah, what's up with that?
I think, and this could just be me.
If it is just you, we'll make fun of you for it.
Deservedly so. All interaction on the internet is good.
Welcome, trolls.
Yeah. So the sewer system in ancient Rome, it was Cloaca Maxima.
Yes.
And there's also a goddess who was over the sewer system. What I'm taking here is that he's setting himself up as the deceiver of the sewers.
Yes. You don't often hear that word except in relationship to bird anatomy these days.
There's been a shift in meaning.
Yes, but it was the Roman sewer system. Well, John J. Johns Jr. got his joke in. He also died, but that's where we're all headed at some point or another.
Just like French?
Yeah, just like French. All right. We have a third story to cover.
Yeah. So number 11.
Xavier McRitty. I'm not sure how to pronounce that.
I'm not sure on that one. At least the first name. Obviously, the most famous Xavier is the leader of the X-Men.
Oh, yes, Professor Xavier.
Yeah.
Oh, man, I was thinking like maybe not him, but go ahead.
Well, and then the next best known, Francis.
Oh, yes, Francis Xavier. Yeah. Saint Francis Xavier.
Yes.
Wolfe has never used a saint name before. This is a first in his literature.
Quite possibly correct. But also known as the Apostle of Japan and China. And so he went over as a missionary to what was the Far East back then.
Yes. But this Xavier is born in Taos, New Mexico.
Presently residing in Berkeley, California.
Okay, so this is a very short story. I didn't count the lines, but I'm thinking it's about 20 lines or less, and these are not very wide lines. So there's not a lot of material to work with here.
There is not. And I think that the whole joke is based off the second sentence here.
Okay, McRitty began his controversial and as yet unfinished novel, The Paper Nautilus, in 1969.
A nautilus is a sea creature that has a shell and it grows out new chambers. So it's always circling itself.
Often used to illustrate a Fibonacci sequence.
Yeah. I think the joke for the next section of lines here is that the story about the story is actually the story, because that's the thing that's unfolding.
Yes. So he has an unfinished novel, and it is about a reviewer for the London Times. His name is great. P. Derek Brewster Higginbotham, who is simultaneously reading and reviewing a novel, Mr. Milton in Madoc, by a mysteriously unsexed writer who signs himself or herself SPD. Okay, so The Paper Nautilus is about a book reviewer who's reading and reviewing a novel. In that novel, the title character who falsely believes himself to be descended from the author of Paradise Lost, has retired to the south of France to compose a dissertation on allegiance to La Villa Real de la Santa Fe de San Francisco by one Gabriel Sebastian de Solo y Varios. So far, 50% of the words in this story are either a person's name or the name of a novel or story, in which an Argentine author, who parenthetically is a thinly disguised surrogate for de Solo y Varios himself, attempts to persuade a reluctant publisher in Buenos Aires to produce a Spanish translation of The Paper Nautilus. What? I think I read this maybe 3 times before I felt like I had the parts clear in my head.
I've read it multiple times, and I'm not even sure that it's entirely clear in my head, but it seems to be a take on a Borges story to me.
Yes, and not just because we have a Spanish named author in it.
Yeah, and Argentina, but in his stories, there's digressions and footnotes and quotes from paragraphs and stories within stories, which annoyingly, sometimes he quotes from real sources, but most of the time they're not real sources. Or he'll translate something and purposely mistranslate things.
So you can have 3 or 4 different stories nested within one another in a Borges story and get lost.
One of the stories, I'm using air quotes here, stories, it's about a guy who's doing research on Jesus, but then we get like different interpretations of Jesus. And supposedly these are from scholarly journal articles.
I thought Borges also, as I read it, but it's such a short vignette that all I get is that sense of twisting up. There's just not a lot more here to work with. I feel like I curled up into a coil myself mentally, but I'm not sure that I came out anywhere.
Neither am I. Then we end with parts of McRitty's book have already appeared in The Tar Baby, a sometimes quarterly review published at Galapagos Junior College. If there's a joke in there, I'm not sure.
Other than a tar baby is sticky and you can't let go of it.
Yeah.
So I feel coiled in on myself and then stuck.
Yeah. So just to clarify there, like, because a lot of people think tar baby is a racist term. So it's actually somewhat ironically, the term actually comes from African American and then over to America. Wow. I'm so used to calling Black people African Americans.
Did you just call Africans African American?
I did. It's African folklore that came over to the Americas through the slave trade, and then that entered into popular storytelling, and then it was recorded, and then Walt Disney made a version of this that shows up in Song of the South.
Which maybe is racist.
Yeah.
But the tar baby, not necessarily.
But the tar baby, not. So it's just that it describes a situation which you try to fix or get involved in, and you can't remove yourself from it because it's holding you there. Galapagos Junior College.
Yes.
The Galapagos are famous islands where Darwin...
And his finches, yes.
Yeah, and then we have Lonesome George, the tortoise that died, but...
Yeah. Well, and the concluding sentence, these excerpts have been well received, and McRitty has hopes of a critical success if he can ever find his way out. Wolfe is not at all puzzled by the fact that I feel coiled up and stuck because he wrote that in. So
that's 9, 10, and 11 for Bibliomen.
Yes, we are working our way through the book. We're about halfway.
Did you have one of these that you liked anymore, or?
I'm not sure. I don't know that any of them particularly resonated for me. Peter O. Henry, I liked him as a character. I would love to see a story that was much more expanded. I'd like to hear about how and why he ended up accused of burglary that he did not commit. There just seemed to be enough threads of interest there that I feel like he could be in a book. John J. Johns, I laughed, and then I felt a little guilty for some of the things that I laughed at. But I did find it, I don't know, it's funny, but it is kind of one note. Like, oh, yes, everybody poops and people don't think that solving that problem is a significant problem to solve, but it really is the biggest problem of human society. And it's cleverly done, but it's just kind of one note. And then I think I've expressed my feelings about Xavier McRitty. So I did have to read it several times to even become clear on it, but I don't feel like I ended up anywhere. So that one fell a little more flat for me.
Yeah, it was a trick question when I asked.
Is that what you wanted to say too?
Yeah, and I was hoping that you would maybe have some insight. Because these three, while I chuckled at them, they were not as fleshed out as some of the other ones. Because some of these could actually be full-blown short stories.
Sister Mary Beatrice Smoot Friarly, SPV.
Yes. And then other ones they're extended linguistic jokes.
Yes, which is actually, I think, a significant part of Wolfe's humor. He likes puns and wordplay and these clever little jokes. And it's not what I tend to come to him for. It's not what I am looking for when I read the books, but I think it's fun. It's playful. And here we have it concentrated into tiny little vignettes without a sustaining narrative around it. And so it's a little unfiltered drop of Wolfe. The unreliable narrators are Amanda Patchen and Brent Towle. And as Gene Wolfe said, only the solitary may see the gods. For the rest, every god is the unknown god.